never. That's what I always say. All right, so let's just kind of start off where we were, which I think was right here. And then I think we have one more convo that we have to go through, and then we can start looking at these part 2 notes. We have to actually start talking about attention and whatnot, you know? That's the topic of the month. Okay, so going back to the topic of simulation, are these always caused by top-down influences? For example, priors in a predictive processing sense at the same region that usually interprets bottom-up signaling. For example, the hypothalamus feeds into the insula, but the insula is biased by top-down expectations. Thus, is the actual simulation happening within the insula, potentially without the actual bottom-up signals? Is it the case that all regions where simulation occurs has a similar top-down influence, affecting activation potentially without the signals that directly demand the same effects? Of course, the actual story is more complicated because there is always top-down prediction at play caused by top-down signals that may have been the effect of other bottom-up signals or top-down biased predictions, etc. All right. This is predictive processing here. Your intuition about the mechanics of simulation is precisely how computational neuroscientists like Carl Friston and Barrett describe the architecture of the cortex. So, right, simulation equals prediction. A simulation is simply the brain sending a top-down prediction down to the primary sensory regions, like the insula or V1 in the visual cortex. It attempts to generate neural activity in those lower regions that matches what would be there if the external internal event were actually happening. As the diagram typically illustrates, predictions flow down from deep layers to superficial layers, and prediction errors flow up. Yo, Onion Helmet. Stan of the Stunner. Oh my gosh, I'm stunning. With a manner and thunder, driving a Hummer to Kroger's Born Stunta. Very nice. Do you have a list of these ready to go? Ready to copy and paste? We have to make a master book of all of the ones set on the channel. I just make them up. Hell yeah. We've got a creative community here. I think I'm just gonna continue where we left off yesterday, and then there's one other Gemini convo that I wanted to read on stream. I forget what that talks about. I think more stuff related to what we're actually supposed to be doing this month, which is like focus and attention. Okay, so yeah, the brain attempts to generate neural activity in those lower regions that matches what would be there if the external event were actually happening. As the diagram typically illustrates, predictions flow down and prediction errors flow up. When you see a real apple, the top-down simulation meets the bottom-up visual data. They cancel out, zero error, and you see an apple. When you imagine an apple, the top-down simulation fires the same neurons in the visual cortex, but there's no bottom-up signal to cancel or verify it. The brain inhibits the error signal, so you don't hallucinate it as real, but you still experience the concept. And then in the case of what Dom was saying yesterday, sometimes you see something that literally isn't there, or you're perceiving something differently than how quote unquote it actually is. And after just some time, after that error actually causes a bunch of cascading responses in the brain, then it comes to you that what you're looking at is actually yourself. Mercedes Maybach, let me hear a brain hack. JP in the back. Apple and cheese as snacks. Okay, relax and lay back. We got money to stack. Facts. I might need to attend a rap battle. We should have rap battles for the community. Community rap battles. Let's put that in the roadmap. Write down where we have. Is this where we have Hogwarts? Yep, Hogwarts system. fun. Rap battles. Very nice. All right, I think we could end the stream there. I think that's all we needed. All right, the insula example is the actual simulation happening within the insula, potentially without the actual bottom-up signals. This is exactly how affect works in the absence of a strong physical trigger. So yes, the pathway bottom up. So the body goes to the vagus nerve. Okay, I have to bring up this disgusting thing that I was working on over the weekend. I'm so sorry for showing this. This is absolutely hideous. Not this. This is page 2 here. All right. We've got, this is like the body, right? We got viscera, we got the skin, the muscles, gut, heart, lungs, glucose, all that stuff. Afferent nerves. So afferent, I believe, is like inward. So like with reference to the brain, I'm guessing. This is all new stuff to me. We got spinal afferents. This is what's reading skin and muscle. We got the vagus afferents. This is reading gut, heart, and lungs. So when this is saying body to vagus nerve, I think this is what that's talking about. We're taking in these signals, and then we've got this type of glucose, temperature, hormones. This is all going to this circumventricular organs, hypothalamic sensors, which goes straight to the hypothalamus. So this is like a way for the hypothalamus to get some quick signals here. But this stuff has to go to the brain stem. All kinds of disgusting stuff here. We got the neuromodulatory systems that are going to be releasing dopamine and stuff like that. Yep. Then it seems like the hypothalamus and thalamus are pretty important in terms of connecting like the cortex and the brain stem. And we were talking about how the thalamus is like a really important relay for signals across the brain, allows for the global workspace. A logic circuit. This was just me trying to, this started with I think I had ChatGPT create like a plant UML diagram, and then I started making, I copied the diagram somehow manually, and then I started adding extra stuff as I saw fit. But I'm not gonna be able to read this thing ever. But this was good for me to just kind of separate these things out. Like what's going on in the brain stem, what's going on in the limbic system, because I hear these words all the time. I just wanted to figure out what's where these things are. Yeah, got amygdala. Okay, then the cortex. We got prefrontal cortex, or at least I think the prefrontal cortex should be like another box inside here that has stuff in it. Then we got the insula we were talking about yesterday. That's what we were just talking about right now, right? We were talking about the insula, right? Is the actual simulation happening within the insula, potentially without actual bottom-up signals? Yes. So before all, it takes a long time for these signals from the body to get all the way over to the insula here. What can happen instead is, the thalamus can, I think, just talk straight to the insula. Yeah. And it can affect these top-down signals, which I think would be coming from I don't know, one of these other cortexes. I can't figure it out yet. This is hilarious because it's such a Stan thing to do. This is definitely some shit I'd pull off for some obscure topic. Right, yeah, unfortunately this is not an obscure topic, even though it, no one wants to actually look into this stuff. This is like one of the most important topics that just is so dry, and it's so much stuff to consider. And these arrows are like a subset of actual arrows. I was just trying to capture, you know, some intuitive notion of what's going on, but I don't know. I don't know how I'm gonna deal with that. We're gonna just put that away for now. All right. Yeah. So the bottom up signals you might be thinking are coming from the body. They go to the vagus nerve, to the brain stem, to the thalamus, and then to the posterior insula, primary sensory cortex of the body. But a top down, we just need the anterior insula, PFC, to the Okay, we could find that, right? We have the anterior insula. Would just talk. Oh, we don't even have an arrow for this, but yeah, it would effectively be like. Oh, I don't even know where do we have. Okay, there we go. We need. Nope, that's not what I was changing. Am I going crazy? Yeah, here we go. It would be something like this. Boom. Arrow. New arrow just unlocked. Top down simulation. But also coming from the, you know what, can I get this to connect to with this? Oh man. Actually, I don't know which part of the prefrontal cortex this would be. I should not mess around with that. All right, let's forget it. Yo, Reclusi, what's good? We're just we're talking about the brain again, of course. Fun stuff. We don't want to actually go into this. This stuff on the right here, ignore it. All right, so the scenario is you're waiting for a job interview. Your body might be relatively calm, so low bottom-up signal, but your anterior insula predicts danger/stress. It blasts the posterior insula with a top-down prediction of a racing heart. So you feel anxiety. You feel anxiety, the simulation, even if the raw physiological signal from the heart hasn't fully caught up yet. The feeling is constructed in the insula based on the prediction. But of course, it's going to affect the heart. And that like creates like a reciprocal feedback loop. But this is just pointing out, this whole predictive processing perspective here is pointing out that, you know, our brain is first faking the signal before the external world external world or your body catches up with the actual, you know, hallucination in this case. That brain map is missing the grok chip that will be default soon. Anxious thought and emotion, also a feedback loop. How's it going, Darmadam? Right, yeah, anxious thought and emotion, also a feedback loop, absolutely, and that's where, you know, mindfulness can calm you down, because you know what your default mode network is doing is just kind of telling a story, and this story is affecting a lot of processes in your brain and body. And if you can quiet that up a little bit, then you can stop it in its tracks when it's trying to say the negative story over and over and over again, causing anxiety. I noticed that loop with anger in particular. The anger is sticky and thought re-triggers it. Right. So, okay, another cool thing about what you said about the grok chip. I think I forget where I heard this. Maybe this was also me just talking with with Gemini or a while back, or I read this somewhere else. No, I read this somewhere else. I read an actual paper on this. Okay. So the cool thing about Neuralink is that it's actually connecting to higher cortical networks in your brain. And what's really odd is that you know, while it can actually, you know, have effects. Yo, Mr. Cookie, welcome. Thanks for following. even though Neuralink can have effects, there's all kinds of weird dynamics that go on when you're trying to connect to the cortex. It'll literally like grow. Like you can't just plug it in. You kind of have to have it grow to connect, in a sense. Who linked this channel in the Camus Discord? Oh, is this channel was this channel linked in the Camus Discord? There's a Camus Discord. So yeah, so you're messing with signals like literally at the top down level, and what's interesting is that there's another method for connecting to the brain, which has been widely used for a little while, that helps people gain like motor movements back when they lose that, but it's not connecting at the neocortex level. It's connecting at a lower level of the brain. It can pull much simpler levers in the brain, and that allows us to provide very simple functionality, but it's not going to have the ability to have as much control over our top-down signaling as something directly connected into the neocortex. That said, it can still create signals that will affect our top-down signaling. It's just, you'd imagine that it wouldn't have as much control over it, and also just the fact that it can't read while it's writing. It'll be less effective for research. All right, that's the extent of my knowledge on that matter. Oh, do you all know each other? Oh, Camus is another streamer. We're not talking about what is it, Albert Camus? Everyone here I've seen in Camus' chat. Nice. Tag is philosophy. Hell yeah. Yeah, that's why you do know we've been in about 10 different streams together. Have we? Yep. Man, I'm surprised that the community is this small. We're really out here. Hey, thank you, Darmanon. Truth. The educational Twitch streams are only a handful, and the Twitch users over 110 IQ are a few too. Well, we don't want to be too exclusionary about IQ. I think everyone's welcome. That being said, like, anyone that's got lower than 90 IQ is not going to stay if they see what's going on my screen right now. But we don't want to show that. $140 IQ graphic. I don't even know if it might be like a 60 IQ graphic for how much I know about the brain. I'm just trying to piece some of these puzzle pieces together. Okay. Does this happen without signals that demand it? Is it the case that all regions where simulation occurs has a similar top-down influence affecting activation potentially without the signals? Verdict. Yes, this is the universal cortical algorithm. Every sensory region works this way. If you close your eyes and visualize a face, you are driving top-down signals into the visual cortex without any bottom-up light hitting your retina. I don't know if that's actually true. I feel like light gets through your eyelids, but I think I don't think you need it in order to create that visual in your mind. Like, I think you could still go into a pitch black room and do the same thing. But auditory cortex, when you get a song stuck in your head, your auditory cortex is being driven entirely by top-down predictions. The hallucination gradient, normal thinking, top-down signal is weak / inhibited. You know it's in your head. And then hallucination, top-down signal is strong and unchecked. The brain mistakes the simulation for bottom-up reality. So this goes to what you were saying yesterday, Dom, looking in the mirror. Now, a lot of the time, this hallucination, like, our brain figures it out really quickly. But there are times where we just, like, don't notice something because we've just predicted it that way, and there was nothing salient enough to actually affect our brain for it to correct itself. So, You have correctly identified that simulation is the act of the brain playing its own sensory keys. It uses the same hardware that processes real input. It drives this hardware top down. It often does this without or in anticipation of the corresponding bottom up signal. So this is huge. I gotta copy this. I gotta put this in to do maybe predictive processing. Where do we have this? There we go. Okay. I'll get to that later. I need to do a lot of organizing with the to-do section here. Okay, I should have given the intro, Mr. Cookie. What we're working on is, I mean, the long-term goal is this determine a path for life, and when I say that, I mean like the tools for each person to be able to figure out what they should do with their life, and what is necessary for us to do that is first just a practical framework for how we can identify and pursue our goals, regardless of what those goals are, before we point that in the direction of determining a path for life. So that's kind of where we're at right now. But all this is founded on what we've been working on for the past like year and a half, which is like a grounded understanding of how we understand the world and our freedom within it. And that's leveraging a lot of science and a little bit of philosophy to, to make sense of it. And the stuff that we're talking about now kind of straddles both part 1 and part 2. So it's always there. But yeah, this is the product of everything that we've been working on. But now we're dealing with a lot of outline notes in part 2. Specifically starting out with this notion of our conscious levers with regards to our ability to pursue anything, right? Like, and we have to talk about attention, focus, motivation. These are like the most bottom fundamental things in terms of a practical framework. We need to know how, our like how we, first of all, how our mind works in this regard. But we should cover a lot of that in part 1. But then we need to know, like, all right, given that discussion that we had, what should we be considering when thinking about how we leverage our mind in the moment? What emotions are involved, biases, energy levels, etc. All these things. Honest question: given the questions you are trying to answer, is the science not secondary to the philosophy? That's a good question. Yeah, so you could make that argument. Like, really, what we have to do is we have to make some sort of conceptualization, right? Like we have to put this stuff in words. This needs to be something that someone can read and understand, and then they can leverage it for their own life. So you could argue that that's all like linguistic philosophy. Like, we are trying to make a story. We're trying to tell a story that is accessible but practical as well, and also carries a lot of like punch. Like, it's got a lot of substance there. Now, the way that we're using our words, we started out in part 1 by committing to what like science tells us about basically about the brain. Like, we're dealing with the brain here. So when we're trying to come up with like a story here, it's kind of beholden to the science. Now, the story is the fundamental thing we're doing. Like, that's at bedrock. We're dealing with we're dealing with linguistic norms, and we're trying to leverage those according to what the science tells us. So you could make an argument that each is subservient to the other, but really they're they're both dependent on each other. Like what we need, like we're not trying to just come up with a speculative philosophy that just feels right and, you know, seems to work. You know, that's what philosophers did before we had science. But science tells us what actually works, and that's how we can, you know, make sure that we are grounded, and we're not positing anything about the world or ourselves that is, you know, straight up metaphysical and faith based. So I think that answers the question. Okay, so then I ask, with in response to all this predictive processing stuff, and just to be clear, from my own understanding, we ought not think about signals as simply an immediate transmission of information, like when we access a website or when we stream YouTube video data. Rather, signals are often transient attractors that persist over time. I imagine that this is how the system can register high fidelity prediction error when a transient attractor prior is not met with the matching bottom up signaling over time. So, sorry about all that. That's not that necessary to understand, but okay, now when considering prediction errors that ultimately lead to the enforcement of the ventral attentional network, where do these prediction errors originate? Is it potentially from many regions? And if so, which region network most directly determines that the prediction error is salient enough to necessitate the release of certain neuromodulators that affect our attention? Is this all basal ganglia stuff? All right. The only thing to point out here, we pointed out that dorsal attention network helps us stay locked in on a chosen task, while the ventral attention network keeps watch for anything unexpected. So if you're trying to intuit these two networks in the brain, this is the top-down one, where we're like exerting top-down signals to keep us locked in on a chosen task. And then the ventral attentional network, you can intuit as that, like the part of the brain where, like, when something goes wrong or something is interesting that happens that was unexpected, that's what drives your attention to that thing. So, you know, in Jordan Peterson land, chaos is felt as our ventral attention network is, you know, grabbing our attention here. Okay. Oh, this is where we get this is the ultimate glaze here. We are operating at a graduate postdoc level. So we gotta not indulge in the glaze of Gemini here. The shift from discrete transmission to dynamical systems is exactly the leap required to understand how a biological brain, as opposed to a digital computer, actually functions. Here is the breakdown of your two inquiries. So this is another reason why, like, it's very difficult to make sense of how a digital system would be able to pull off the brain. Signals as transient attractors. You've described metastability in dynamic systems. So instead of when we intuitively think about, or when a software inclined person, maybe computer inclined person thinks about, data packets, it just happens. It arrives at this second, it's processed, it's done. But the brain enters a state space, for some amount of time. Like, it's as if these neurons are all going to be active in the sense that they're firing rapidly for some non-zero amount of time. The brain settles into a valley of energy, for example, expecting a red light. This state is stable and persists. Sensory data pushes against this state. So this is the prior. The prior is like this. This is the expectation that we have. Then bottom-up signals are going to clash. And there's part of the brain that determines whether or not that clash is salient enough to cause your attention to change or cause anything else that happens. Okay, what's going on here? We are operating at a Damasio level. Hell yeah. What's my opinion summary of Jordan Peterson? Um, what's the summary? Okay, I think this makes it easy. I don't really know what he's been doing for the past 5 years, but I am like a I've listened and watched a lot of Jordan Peterson, his content from 2017 to 2019, let's just say. So like maps of meaning stuff, I recognize like it's the back of my hand. Um, the personality stuff, I think I've heard like each of the Jordan Petersonisms like 20 times. And I think it's really like I really like it. I think it was really helpful for me to get into this like philosophy science space, like where these two things connect. And I also think it's probably quite beneficial for people. That's the other thing. It seems like his stuff has had a huge positive impact on a lot of people, and I don't think we've experienced the downstream effects of that yet. I think that a lot of people, you know, turned their life around, or got themselves working on something, or directed their life in an order that's gonna lead to positive outcomes down the line. At the same time, though, I've noticed that he's been more recently, a little more perhaps, I don't know, hateful or resentful in times, and that can negatively affect people. So it's very difficult to make these types of like overall, are they good, are they bad type things. It's just that, yeah, it's an interesting case study, I'll tell you that. To me, he is an interesting avatar of collection of West ideas, but too much repression or anger or whatever is going on with him. Now, to be fair to him, he's mentioned that he's suffered from depression his entire life, and we know that that has flared, quite recently, multiple times over, especially in conjunction with that other stuff that he had. And then the fact that he now just had the oh, I don't know if it was an allergic reaction, but whatever reaction to the mold. So like all these things are probably just throwing his body for a loop. So you can almost like empathize with the type of experience that he's going through. JP was what was missing from the whole self-help space, if you can call it that. Then he changed path. Sometimes when Dom types, I think of wise Buddhist monk on top of a mountain, or Master Oogway speaking. We should do a stream from on top of a mountain one time. Fan meet up at the top of the mountain. Okay. If the sensory data green light provides enough energy to push the system up the hill and out of the red light valley, and this is all just using metaphors here, the attractor collapses, or the system undergoes a phase transition to a new attractor. This requires temporal integration. A single spike of contradictory input might not be enough to push the system out of a deep attractor well. The error signal must accumulate over milliseconds to overcome the inertia of the prediction. This accumulation is what allows us to ignore noise but react to genuine change. So this is how we can make sense of, even though our top-down signals are kind of setting the stage and are causing us to expect things before bottom-up signals might even occur, our bottom-up signals will throw those priors out of that loop, almost immediately, if there is truly salient difference, or maybe not even salient difference. Like when you look at things, your view is still affected by bottom up signals that are so like sensory data coming in, the photons at which you're looking. Yeah. All right, the origin everywhere. Every column in the cortex generates local prediction errors constantly. For example, you are walking, your foot slips slightly, your motor cortex generates a tiny prediction error. Most of these are resolved locally. You adjust your foot automatically. They are low precision errors. They do not reach global awareness. So this is a similar story that we have in the document. The salience network. So this is like a specific network that is looking for high precision errors here. For a prediction error to trigger a global shift, it must be assessed high precision, high gain. The brain asks, does this error matter for my body or my survival budget? And this is where we get, anterior insula and the anterior cingulate cortex. These are cortical areas. These regions monitor the cost of the error. If the slip is large, the insula flags it as a metabolic threat. And, because of our cortex, we can store. We can store a lot of like this relational data of, what are the implications of this type of thing that we understand. So, I imagine like slipping is pretty obvious of an example, but this is how we can get to the point where it's like when your boss tells you lost your job, like your brain can know that information means all these ramifications, it knows, okay, because of that information we have to fire these signals to these parts of the brain, and that causes your heart rate to go up, and that causes you to feel a certain way. Once again, though, I'm using metaphors for parts of the brain actually like intentionally doing things. At the end of the day, or when you actually look at this stuff, what's happening is just chemistry, and and these electrochemical signals like that. It's just happening. It just kind of happens, and we're trying to interpret what we're seeing. All right, the circuit breaker. Norepinephrine, this is the chemical switch. If the salience network decides the error is critical, it fires down to the locus coeruleus. Coeruleus? I don't know. In the brainstem, the LC floods the cortex with norepinephrine. So this is noradrenaline. This acts as a reset button. It breaks the existing stable attractors and increases the signal-to-noise ratio of the incoming sensory data. This is the moment the ventral attention network takes over, as we just read. Okay, I asked, is this all basal ganglia stuff? It's not all basal ganglia, but the basal ganglia is the gatekeeper. It receives input from the cortex saying, I have a new competing plan. The basal ganglia inhibits or disinhibits the thalamus. It decides whether to let this new error signal interrupt the current program. Okay, that's not that important here. All right, the summary. Prediction error is the accumulation of sensory energy pushing against a persistent attractor prior. Salience is the assignment of precision or weight to that error, largely determined by the insula and anterior cingulate cortex, based on body budgetary needs. Attention shift is the result of spraying norepinephrine. This is it's acting as a neuromodulator, so the brain like releases it diffusely, and that affects a lot of synaptic dynamics. Okay. And then I say, and I'm guessing that the AI and anterior cingulate cortex, so this is the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, determine severity of error similarly by comparing top-down signals, what would be priors in this case, with bottom-up signals, what would be the actual signals of prediction error. Thus, this would be a prediction error of prediction error type of equation. In other words, how much prediction error is expected for this situation? As you mentioned, perhaps this is some sort of cost analysis, yet I'd imagine that the ACC and AI don't inherently know what cost means other than via comparing these signals. Of course, the effects of the ACC and AI deeming that the signal is salient results in downstream changes to attention, movement, global changes. All right, precision weighting. This is one of the most sophisticated components of the predictive processing framework. The salience network does not have a magic cost meter. It performs this function exactly as you surmise by comparing signals. Okay, so the cool thing here though is there's like this meta prediction type deal. So parts of the brain might give off prediction error, but that prediction error might not be that important, or it might be expected. Like if a certain part of the brain's prediction error has already been factored into the equation, then that's not that big of a deal. But if it's like, oh, we're getting a lot of prediction error here, we didn't expect this much prediction error here, we have to sound the alarm. Why Gemini over ChatGPT? That's a good question. I think Gemini's doing better in the leaderboards right now. I should have something that finds this, but LLM leaderboard. How do we find this stuff? Do I have it here? No. Does this give it to us? Oh, GPT is actually is up there. One of the main reasons, though, that I've been sticking with Gemini is one, just their track record for the past like 12 months, and two, their huge context window. So the fact that they have a large context window means that I don't have to be worried about how large this conversation is. I could also throw in books. I could throw in this entire document. Sometimes I just download this document and throw it into a Gemini conversation. GPT, I'm actually paying for both of them just because I think they're both important. But perhaps I give up on ChatGPT at some point. We'll see. We'll see where the cards land over the next few months. He's rich. Not quite, but I value these LLMs much more highly than a lot of people do. I personally don't like the new GPT model. What's your intuition about it? Like, what does it feel like? How does it feel different from previous ChatGPT models? Okay. All right, in formal terms, the brain predicts two things simultaneously. So imagine that it's predicting, first of all, this is like when we were talking about the maps of maps, like the brain is mapping information, but it's mapping that it's not just going to be two orders of prediction. It's predicting all kinds of stuff, and it's hard to like actually interpret, that it's predicting like a first order versus second order type of system. However, this is rather intuitive, this abstraction. So imagine you predict the temperature will be 72 Fahrenheit, and the precision, the second order, I predict the error on my temperature guess will be low. You are walking in a dark forest. Content prediction. I see a shape. Precision prediction. I expect high prediction error because it is dark and my eyes are unreliable. So if you get a massive visual error, you see a blur, the ACC compares it to the expected error. So if expected error equals high and the actual error equals high, there's no surprise here. But if the expected error is low and the actual error is high, then trigger alarm. Right. Okay. The brain doesn't know cost in an abstract sense. It just knows deviation from homeostasis. Deep in the brainstem and hypothalamus, there are hard-coded priors for survival. Glucose must be X, oxygen must be Y, temperature must be Z. The anterior insula maps these body states. Cost is physically instantiated as interceptive prediction error. If a plan, for example, run a marathon, is simulated, the AI receives a prediction. This will deplete glucose by 40%. The AI compares this to the safety prior. Don't die. I got to get another picture of Brian Johnson up when I say that. A massive error signal labeled unpleasantness or fatigue. All right. I don't think that was the nicest way to explain that, but cost is simply the magnitude of the predicted error signal relative to the body's viability constraints. The brain feels cost as negative affect. Right. Okay, and then role of dopamine, norepinephrine. When the ACC AI detects this meta error, it doesn't just pass this info along, it triggers the release of neuromodulators like acetylcholine and norepinephrine. These chemicals physically alter the synaptic gain sensitivity of the neurons encoding the error. All right, all right. Then I say, given everything that we've discussed in this conversation, are there additional contemporary insights that I might not have grasped yet? Anything else within the past couple of years that would put me right up to the front lines of our scientific understanding? Not for the same reasons as others. Others seem to suggest that it's too cold. Maybe they switched too far because people thought it was too warm. That's not my issue. I want it to be cold. My issue is it seems to be way more confident about how smart it is. So sometimes if you have philosophy convos with it, it is lacking sometimes, but just overly confident about it. That's just my opinion. Love to hear others. Yeah, I unfortunately haven't used it enough to like notice that type of issue. At this point, I use ChatGPT for everyday problems or questions, like it's my Google replacement. And then like Gemini is when I'm trying to do like the harder work. But then a lot of times I just ask Gemini about the everyday questions anyway. Have you ever hallucinated? I had one once that comes up in Tibet called Teagle, like seeing orbs. What were you on out from meditating? You want visual? It's easy with candle meditation, but that's seen as not a super safe one. Right, yeah, like I always feel like with meditating, like you are like if I don't want to be concerned about anything. Like I think it would keep me out of it. So like if there was some uh potential hazard, I feel like that would make it more difficult for me. But maybe that's what I want. Maybe I want it to be more difficult. Like I was thinking that when I'm doing a mindfulness meditation and I'm doing it in the comfort of wherever I'm sitting, and there's nothing that can happen, then I'm training my mind in a very specific type of situation. But what would be really effective is if I like go to a public place and meditate, or if I were to go somewhere that would be very novel, or like I'd imagine that a lot of unexpected things would happen while I'm meditating, and try to just keep that focus. There's a little risk involved there, but it would probably be a more effective strength training in terms of some of the skills that I'm looking for. Always some hazards. Walking meditation can help with that, or maybe you're describing informal meditation. Oh wow. I guess yeah. I guess I could do walking meditation where I'm outside and obviously eyes open. Yeah, no, I'll probably start switching it up once we get to March. But I'm trying to just build up this one skill now. Okay. To push you to the absolute front lines, there are three major developments that refine the architecture you have just constructed. These insights address the gaps in the current standard model regarding generalization, control, and curiosity. All right, the universal algebra of the brain. You correctly intuited that the brain creates ad hoc maps for different contexts. The cutting-edge formalization of this is the Tolman-Eichenbaum machine and its successors. So, yeah, I think this is the same entorhinal cortex stuff. So, the brain explicitly separates structure from content. So the old view is you learn restaurant A and then restaurant B separately. The new view is the entorhinal cortex learns a generic restaurant template, and when you walk into a new restaurant you have never seen, your brain instantly clones this structural template and slots in the new sensory data. Those words are simplistic. They're reductive, but that's like a decent metaphor for the functional processes going on. This explains how we understand analogies so fast. It confirms your context-dependent intuition, but adds that we carry around abstract skeletons of reality that we drape new sensory skins over. So that would be this is like one of the easiest places we can ground the notion of universals in. Like, universals in our mind are literally these skeletons of information. Buddha has some line about how from perception we conceptualize what we perceive and project that out and start to see the concept instead. Well, I mean, that's incredibly wise, because I think that's what we end up doing regardless. Like, at some point you have to stop meditating, right? You have to know that the time is done, or you have to think, okay, I want to stop now. Like, you've already just now brought out so much conceptual knowledge into the mix. There's no running from our conceptual understanding. All right, the claustrum, the conductor of the gain. You identified the salience network as the decision maker and the basal ganglia as the gatekeeper, but the claustrum has emerged as a critical piece of the consciousness puzzle. It is a thin sheet of neurons hidden deep under the insula cortex with connections to almost every part of the cortex. It acts as a synchronization switch for the global neuronal workspace. While the basal ganglia gates action, the claustrum appears to gate cortical noise. It coordinates the slow wave activity that binds different cortical areas together. Researchers now suspect the claustrum is the specific hardware that implements the precision weighting you described. It suppresses the noise of irrelevant cortical areas so the signal of the salient area can dominate. All right, and then number 3, epistemic forging. Why we don't stay in the dark. Your model currently focuses on minimizing error. This creates the darkroom problem. If the goal is purely to minimize prediction error, the best strategy is to sit in a dark, silent room and never move. Obviously, we don't do that. So, active inference. The brain minimizes 2 terms, not 1. Pragmatic value, staying within the biological limits, and epistemic value, reducing uncertainty about the future. So, yeah, it needs to do both of these things. It's trying to effectively deal with our homeostasis going into the future. So, this idea of allostasis. So all of the knowledge we know is, and the things we think about, our thoughts, are all in service of this other aspect of our neural processing. That's what we got from Lisa Feldman Barrett's book. The brain is not for thinking. The brain is for allostasis. And thinking is just one of the tools it uses to manage allostasis. I love this Krishnamurti quote that relates in all our relationships. Each one of us builds an image about the other, and these 2 images have relationship, not the human beings themselves. Hey, I like it. You have to prove thoughts exist first, buddy. That's kind of what we've been doing this whole time. I mean, it's the same issue of consciousness itself, but I think the point is that we know enough about where consciousness resides in terms of, like, our understanding of the physical brain tells us that consciousness does not reside outside the brain, right? Like, it doesn't reside right here for me in the air. Whatever it is, it's a result of the processes that are happening within this physical space. So even though we haven't figured out the exact neurons that are being leveraged, we have a good idea of how each of the parts of the brain contribute to this experience, and we still don't know about, like, at the bottom level how these these mappings, or no, it's really like why these mappings make this type of feeling. Now, there's an intuitive reasoning, like, just imagine that like everything we experience is some mapping of information. And even our consideration of what we think we feel is the brain trying to make sense of of other signals. Like, it's just signals that came from signals that are affected by our culture, that affects our memory and context and pattern recognition, and we leverage those to make sense of the signals we experience. But we can certainly find signs of thoughts in the brain, and many signs. All right. The brain creates a prediction of learning. It predicts that if it goes to a new chaotic environment, it will gain a better model for the future. Dopamine's dual role: it doesn't just signal reward, it signals information prediction error. This was surprisingly informative. This is why we doom scroll or explore dangerous ideas. The brain is addicted to reducing uncertainties, sometimes even more than it cares about safety. And once again, like, dopamine is a pull. It's the system that drives you towards something, towards resolving that uncertainty, you could say. Everything that we say exists is just a linguistic misunderstanding. Whoa. I mean, yeah, like, at a fundamental level, everything that I believe exists and that I might say exists is by principle misunderstood by everyone that hears me in some way. Now, pragmatically, we'd say we probably understand what we mean most of the time, or a lot of the time. When I say that this is a pen, like, pragmatically speaking, you understand what I'm getting at. But when I say this is a pen, what I'm implying is not going to be exactly what you infer from what I just said, because we each have different understandings of what it means for that to be a pen. Okay, then I said, has Dewan officially discussed the claustrum in conjunction with the global neuronal workspace? It says no. Has not officially incorporated the claustrum. The workspace is emphatically cortical. However, the intuition to link them is scientifically sound and represents a convergence currently happening in the field that bridges two rival theories. The conductor versus the broadcaster. So the broadcaster would be the relay here, and the conductor would be what's actually setting this tempo. So I think the synthesis where we are now, recent findings suggest that both camps were partially right, and your model effectively merges them. How exactly do widely separated cortical areas synchronize instantly? Who sets the tempo? The solution: the claustrum as router. The claustrum isn't the content of consciousness. It doesn't see or hear, but it might be the gain controller that allows the global neuronal workspace to form. Researchers are now proposing that the claustrum acts as the switchboard for the global workspace. Okay. We can move past that. Okay, before we move on, can you comprehensively and extensively summarize everything we've discussed so far in this entire conversation? So we don't have to go through all these things, but we talked about the myth of the triune brain. We moved past that. Then we talked about the mechanism of thought, embodied simulation. Now, this isn't just like, as we said, like embodied simulation of, when you hear the word kick, your brain thinks it activates parts of your brain that would be involved with kicking, except that it inhibits the parts that actually make your muscles kick. This type of simulation happens for all concepts in ways that we discussed with the entorhinal cortex, such that we're dealing with the same parts of the brain that deal with physical space and mapping movement. I was saying that it might be the case that our brain is simulating the parts of our brain that deals with us actually saying words but not actually moving those muscles. So that's a way for us to, keep track of a lot more complex concepts and stories and things strung together. The operating predictive processing and allostasis. The feeling of truth. We established affective realism that I still have to look into more closely. The control system, error, salience, and gating. This is what we talked about today. The synthesis consciousness. We talked about that. The frontiers. Then we talked about those frontiers. Go have a strawberry lemonade. Oh my gosh, I wish I had a strawberry lemonade here. The Matrix figured this stuff out eons ago. We got to get Embrace Tribalism in here to tell us about the Matrix. Researchers have concluded that when participants think of the words onion and helmet, they immediately think of a handsome man and the color purple. Lim, and Lim 2015. Yeah, are there not 4 people with the last name Helmet that would be able to corroborate? And then I say, okay, but I'm not simply attempting to construct a plausible and sound model of the brain. I'm trying to find or determine what our leading science allows us to believe. Of course, there is debate about what our science implies, so we need to be somewhat careful with these inferences. So it says, you are absolutely right to pull the emergency brake here. In our enthusiasm to build a coherent system, we have done what the brain itself does. We created a smooth, high-certainty narrative by bridging gaps with inference. If your goal is to determine what the current science forces us to accept versus what is a leading hypothesis, we need to perform an epistemic audit. Here is the breakdown of our conversation, graded by scientific certainty. The hard facts, high confidence. These are empirically validated, widely accepted, and unlikely to be overturned. Homology and evolution, the manufacturing plan. This is what we talked about at the first, when we first started this. The genetic and developmental similarities between vertebrate brains are undeniable. The triune brain is dead. RIP. RIP. What you can believe. Animal brains are not less evolved versions of ours. They are different recipes using the same ingredients. Animals have the hardware for affect because they regulate bodies. All right, allostasis, body budgeting. Fact. The brain's primary metabolic function is regulating the body's internal milieu. What you can believe. Thinking is metabolically expensive and intimately tied to body states. There is no rationality detached from the body's energy needs. RIP. All right, grid cells and navigation. Fact, we know grid cells exist. Nobel Prize 2014. We know they activate during some conceptual tasks. The brain, what you can believe, the brain can and does use spatial mapping hardware for abstract tasks. There's no one with that last name Helmet. You gotta start a tradition. You have to start a trend. All right, the leading frameworks, medium confidence. These are the dominant models in top journals. They explain the data best, but competing models exist. Predictive processing, the simulation. So status, it's a dominant paradigm, but debated scope. Most neuroscientists agree the brain predicts top down. The debate is everything prediction, the radical view of Friston and Barrett, or is it just one tool among many? Now, one of the reasons that might make you think that it's it's everything. It's the radical view is I don't know if anyone remembers or if anyone was here when we were like looking up the consciousness research, and there was that one guy that was talking about how even for a single neuron, there's predictive logic happening within the neuron's dendrite. Is it? Would you say it? Does a neuron have multiple dendrites? I think it's okay. Okay, so yeah, which can invent. Okay, and then what about axons? No. Okay, so a neuron has an axon. It has multiple dendrites. Is that the way we're supposed to go about this? Although some neurons do not have any dendrites. What is that? How do you do that? Dendrites can have small protrusions called dendritic spines, which further increase. All right. Multipolar neurons are typically characterized by a single axon and 2 or more dendrites. I don't know if this is actually... I'm just trying to figure out what the right way of saying this is. It's not that important to what we're talking about. But anyway, the dude pointed out that there's like actual logic happening within the dendrite. And, you know, this is like the part of the neuron where signals are coming in, like inbound to the neuron. So prediction... and the other thing that he found was that signals that come in closer to the actual nucleus of the neuron act as priors for the signals that are coming from like the farther away from the dendrite's reach. So the takeaway being there is that like predictive processing is happening not only with like a broad scale system, but within these dendrites logic. So okay. Then how did you do that? What is that in response to? Okay, so yeah, like in my mind, but yeah, okay. However, given what we just found, where there's like a variation of the type of neuron in the brain in terms of how many dendrites it has, that type of prediction could, I think, only happens. Oh yeah, that guy was talking about. It only happens in like the pyramid neurons. I don't know enough about this stuff, but it wouldn't happen in all the neurons. So everything I just said doesn't actually point towards, or doesn't supply us with an effective argument for this radical view. It's just more of an interesting tidbit. Okay, the counterpoint. Some argue for hybrid models where bottom-up processing is still distinct and not just error checking. Okay. And the question is, like, conceptually, what is going to be the difference if the important parts of the brain have that predictive processing? Like, does it matter if there's no prediction happening before we get to, the, like the thalamus or something like that? But I think this is all cortical, right? I don't know. Yeah, or the insula, given the interconnectedness of top-down and bottom-up signals. What you can believe. Your experience is heavily shaped by priors. You are likely simulating reality, not just recording it, but saying it's all just prediction error minimization is a theoretical stance, not a proven law. Okay. What else is medium confidence? Global neuronal workspace, medium confidence, leading framework. So it's a leading theory of access. It correlates extremely well with what we see in conscious versus unconscious states. The counter view, integrated information theory, this is what we talked about yesterday, is the main rival. IIT argues consciousness is about structure, not broadcast. So structure and complexity here. IIT would argue a system could be conscious without the global broadcast if it is integrated enough. All right. What you can believe, the ignition event is a real neural signature of conscious access. Whether that ignition is consciousness or just reports it is the philosophical gap. All right. Neural reuse. Strong consensus. It solves the evolutionary efficiency problem. What you can believe. It is highly probable that we don't have a special logic module. We are almost certainly thinking with our motor, sensory, navigation cortices. So, wild stuff. All right. We're getting to inferences, low confidence / frontier. These are the logical bridges we built. They make sense, but science hasn't fully nailed them down yet. So the universal map, this is the thing that they said that was proposed like a year ago or so. The idea that all concepts are grid cell maps is a bold extrapolation. It's elegant, but we haven't found justice grid cells or irony grid cells yet. And the question is, like, following embodied, like an embodied cognition type of perspective, like, isn't the point that we don't need to find those types of cells, so we can, we're leveraging the neural reuse stuff to point out how it would deal with all these concepts. But we just haven't gotten enough, so we don't have enough empirical evidence yet. Caution, it is possible that the brain uses grid cells for structural concepts, but uses entirely different non-spatial mechanisms for other types of abstract thought. The claustrum as the GNW switchboard. It's a hypothesis. The anatomy fits, and recent lesion studies support it, but this is not textbook science yet. It's a hot topic. And then the specific cost equation in the anterior cingulate cortex. Status computational model. The hierarchical Gaussian filter describes the behavior perfectly, but we are still hunting for the exact neurons that perform the division or precision weighting calculations. Okay, we didn't really go into that. So, all right. So, what science allows you to believe you are on safe ground believing that you are an animal? Your brain is a body regulator first, a thinker second. You are a simulator. You experience your predictions checked against reality. You are a navigator. You map concepts using spatial coordinates. You should remain cautious about universalizing the theories. Not everything might be a map. Not everything might be a prediction. The brain is likely a bag of tricks, not a single algorithm. So yeah, this is saying let's be cautious about what we might imply with such an overarching universal theory. The location of consciousness. We still don't know if it's the broadcast, the structure, or the interaction. Right. This is kind of where we left off. We don't know exactly where the where the consciousness, or how we should talk about consciousness. Is it just structure? Is it married to substrate? Is it is it because of broadcast as in the global neuronal workspace theory? Does this audit help ground the model for you? Okay. Directly quoting me. How do node dendrites work? Oh, is that what I said? Dendrites don't exist. It's a figment of my imagination. This Gemini typing is hilarious. I don't know why. Summary, what science allows you to believe. So that's because I asked it that, right? But the 1, 2, and 3 are hilarious. I do agree. Like, I specifically asked it, like, what are we allowed to believe? Allows us to believe. But this is so funny how it's just like, you are an animal. You're allowed to believe that you're an animal. Simulator, navigator. All right. Then I say, now that we laid all that out, let's change focus slightly. Let's focus on our conscious experience of top-down intention, which is different than the more broad and scientifically accurate concept of top-down signals. So, top-down signals are pretty broad, right? That's a pretty broad concept or set of signaling in the brain. Not all top-down signals are conscious. Like we're obviously a lot of these top-down signals are unconscious. It might not even be like appropriate to say that top-down signals are things that are conscious in general. It also might be weird to say that it's only top-down signals that are conscious. It's an amalgamation of top-down and bottom-up signals that would describe what consciousness is. That's kind of what we discovered in that video. So we're looking for like the experience of I'm employing my intention, or I am focusing on this, or even more broadly, thoughts of agency like I am climbing up the stairs. Let's focus on how that type of conscious experience affects our neural dynamics and resulting behavior, whether that is simply holding focus on a thought, pointing our body and attention at something, or getting our muscles to carry out more complex tasks like walking up steps. I want to find the practical story. How can we think about this type of thinking and how it can be cognizantly utilized? So this is where we finally get into the type of topic that we need to look at for this month. Show me a dendrite, I only see quarks. Fair play. I don't see anything except quarks, right? If that would actually be the right way of saying that. I guess that would be the right way of saying that. But we have to abstract some things. Those abstractions are empirical. It's just some empirical interpretation. It's not some like absolute truth. All right, this is the $1 million pivot. You are moving from mechanics to driver education. How to steer it. The scientific consensus, including Barrett, Dewan, and Friston, is that while the self may be a narrative construct, the experience of intention is a biologically real, high-energy state that exerts causal power over the body. Okay, so this is actually very close to what we talked about in part 1 when we talked about the topic of intentionality. When we conceptualize our own implicit activity, agency, and intentionality here. Let's ride. Just memeing. Hell yeah. Life is all about memeing. Okay, having explored the self as the central participant of our meaningful world, we now turn to the nature of that participation. We can propose a way of framing the fundamental unconscious activity implicit in our experience. Unlike concrete actions that we can easily observe, like speaking or walking, our moment-to-moment sense-making happens automatically. However, upon reflection, as we mentioned, we can explicitly characterize this activity. We have so far used terms such as recognize, interpret, and understand to describe this continuous active engagement in the experience of meaning. When we recognize some aspect of the world, we usually do not simultaneously recognize that we are recognizing it. We engage in this implicit activity automatically, shaping our experience without needing to be explicitly acknowledged. Keeping with our recent insights about the fundamental connection between our self-understanding and the way we experience meaning, we can conceptualize this implicit activity as an act of commitment. When we recognize something, we take it to be a certain way. For example, to recognize a chair is to commit to it as a chair, with all that entails. This framing allows us to see even the most basic acts of perception as a form of agency, a constant implicit assertion about the way the world is, imbued with the affective conviction that arises from our predictive processes. This perspective reveals an inextricable link between our participation in meaning and our grasp of a determinate semantic world. The act of recognizing anything at all carries an implicit commitment that our understanding is oriented toward a world that is structured and knowable. When we take an object to be a chair, we commit to its existence as such, not just as a fleeting subjective impression, but as a determinate part of the world. In doing so, we commit to the semantic structure that gives the concept its meaning. If we identify an animal as a cat, our commitment necessarily includes its incompatibility with it being a dog. In this framing, our subjective agency is thus always already bound by these relations of possibility, impossibility, and consequence that structure our intelligible world. We should say that structure our understanding. So yeah, the idea is that like what we end up thinking to be real, what we commit to, is always downstream from these primitive allostatic regulatory processes. You know, our brain is just body budgeting, and downstream from that is the brain committing to ways the world is and acting that out. And when the world, when the physical world around it pushes back on those predictions, then the brain updates its models. It causes all kinds of processes that result in emotions. Those emotions affect learning, and the learning affects the model. The model affects the prediction, and it's just this loop. But it's all in service of body budgeting, in service of allostasis, homeostasis, survival. You know, this is how the brain is wired in terms of its DNA. Okay. To further open this perspective up to the normative side of our conceptual understanding, we can consider this activity as making judgments. When we commit to the world being a certain way, we are making an implicit judgment about how it ought to be interpreted according to our internalized norms. Our discussion of the normative structure of understanding allows us to see these commitments as deeply aligned with our socially induced learning. We judge the world in ways that have been shaped and reinforced by our participation in a shared community of meaning. More clearly put, like we internalize these norms, and that affects how the judgments we make. We must keep in mind that such commitments and judgments are themselves a manifestation of our implicit understanding and our broader predisposition. The powerful feeling of certainty that accompanies a fluent recognition is the experiential effect of our predictive processing, resolving prediction error at a granular level and reinforcing our commitment to the world being as we take it to be. Thus, our most fundamental sense of the world's intelligibility is not merely an abstract philosophical stance, but a biologically reinforced and experientially validated commitment. It feels certain. And once again, our consciousness is just along for the ride as far as we are concerned, as far as we can conceptualize it. But at the same time, we understand that our consciousness is affecting all kinds of downstream processes that are oriented in this same direction that we aren't aware of. Crucially, as we have discussed, this process forms a continuous dynamic feedback loop. Every commitment we make, shaped by our past, also helps to shape our future. The experience of meaning that arises from a judgment affects our underlying neurodynamic processes, subtly reinforcing or revising the schematic pathways that produced it. Thus, each act of understanding functions as a moment of learning that retunes our predisposition, influencing the very commitments we are likely to make in the next moment. All right, but this is what I'm trying to get at here. Consequently, we can consider how our commitments are inherently intentional. They are oriented towards coherence. We are driven to act, both physically and cognitively, by directing attention in ways that make our sensory experience align with our predictive models. When we commit to the world being a certain way, our intentionality is expressed in the way we engage with the world to confirm and sustain that commitment, ensuring our experience remains coherent. Going back to when we talked about predictive processing, there's these two ways we could think about it. We could think that we update our understanding to match what we experience, but the other way about doing this is to act in the world such that our understanding is met. And both of those things are going at the same time. Or we can interpret both of those happening at the same time. Okay. Furthermore, we can now consider how our commitments make us responsible. By making a commitment, by judging the world to be a certain way, we reconfigure our own predictive understanding. We are now responsible for that commitment in the sense that our own system is predisposed to predict that the world will conform to it. We are now liable to our own future experience. If the world violates our commitment, it is our own system that will register the prediction error, the felt dissonance of a failed judgment. This intimate accountability to the consequences of our own past commitments is the very essence of our ongoing affective experience of predictive processing. If our agency is this dynamic process of making predisposed, subjective, and norm-governed commitments, what does this imply about the nature of the commitments themselves? This is where we get to the speculative, creative nature of our agency, which we talked about yesterday. But the idea here is that we're coming up with a conceptualization, a way that we can make sense of what we're doing in the moment. How can we bridge the gap between this idea of activity and freedom with what we understand to be happening at the lowest level in the brain? And this is my attempt at making that bridge. We are conceptualizing the implicit activity that we are carrying out in every moment, regardless of what we're thinking, regardless of whether we're even considering that we're doing this. Most of this, it's pretty much all unconscious to us that we're taking the world to be a certain way in every moment. But that's the point. Like, I'm trying to. This is truly an exercise in mindfulness. It's pay attention to how your brain is telling you what it thinks is true, and you'll notice that it's always, as Heidegger pointed out, it's always ahead of itself. It's always not resolved on what it thinks it's true. It's always jumping to the next thing. So it's constantly oriented towards. And that's where we can get this notion of intentionality. Like, we're along for this ride where our brain is always intending towards something. And we can interpret as, it's intending towards reducing this friction. And, But once again, it's, as we just looked at above, it's not that it's just trying to reduce prediction error. It's also trying to reduce uncertainty about the future. So it needs to do all these things, and obviously the context is changing constantly. Once we get hungry, that's putting an extra little pull on the system, and that's affecting what we think, what we see. You can meditate to perceive intentions as super transient mental things. It's trippy. They can feel impersonal. Yeah, I think that's the point. Like, we're not in control of these instinctual drives, and we can meditate on the feeling of dopamine itself, as our brain is just trying. Like, when we're trying to, when you're trying to do a very simple mindfulness meditation where you're just trying to focus on thought, focus on breathing, and your brain is attempting to think through something, whether it's concerned about the future, it's doing some fun thinking, it's trying to indulge itself. Like, you can see the brain is it's like intending to do all these things, and you have to say, we got to chill, we got to just sit here. Like, you're exerting some sort of you could say it's a top-down signal, but it's not like it is a top-down signal on this whole conversation points out that it's not like you're trying to put a top-down signal on these bottom-up drives. The bottom-up, or the drives that you're noticing in when you're meditating and you're seeing your mind try to go in these different directions, are also top-down. It's these top-down and bottom-up feedback loops that are pushing you in directions of thought. And so it's very odd to, like, strip away what our conscious thinking is and what it does and how it affects the trajectory of our brain. Like, I believe the Buddhist theory would be intentions precede actions and are lost in the fast-paced weave job the mind is doing. But you dig, improve your perception, note intentions before lifting each leg and walking meditation, and you start to see them clearer. Okay. Intentions precede action and are lost in the fast-paced weave job the mind is doing. But you improve your perception and notice intentions, and you start to see them clearer. Yep. No, I agree. I think that's what you can do. You can notice that. Now, I don't think it's possible to like you're not going to be able to completely gain control over this type of most fundamental intentionality of the brain. Like I think that's the discovery that usually like is at the bottom of this. It's like you have to expect the unexpected. You have to expect uncertainty. Your brain is going to be oriented in so many ways that you're just not going to be able to control. Like you can't cancel out your was it the ventral attention network? This is the one that moments of sudden and unexpected stimuli. Yeah, like no amount of meditation is going to cancel the ventral attention network. Now, it can significantly make unexpected occurrences to feel significantly less negative or salient. But yeah, your mind is going to constantly be behaving as it does. What does that network do? That's the network that will, if something were to be going, if something unexpected happens, that's the network that will grab your attention and make sure that becomes conscious to you, essentially. The trend with mega dose meditation is like more activity and synchronization overall. Maybe ask AI if that is true. Okay, is it true that the trend... I legit feel like by the end of this, we're going to end up having neuroscientist level science knowledge. Oh, absolutely. If I meet a neuroscientist, should I bring them into the chat? Absolutely. And like the goal would be, if we got an actual neuroscientist here, it would be like, am I speaking about anything inappropriately such that I should change the phrasing? And also, obviously, like, are we talking about anything that, perhaps we shouldn't be talking about, or perhaps that are we missing anything? Is there anything more to the story that we're missing? I think that's going to be one of the nicest parts about getting more people in this chat and in the community in general, is we get more feedback on when I'm, not speaking about these things perfectly, which I am most certainly not. So I just need to know which direction I should go in. I mean, it's really helpful for me to read these books, because then I can see how neuroscientists are talking about these things. And now that I'm already like decently primed with these ideas, I'm able to recognize the differences, the discrepancies. Twitch, isn't that like a game website? Who said that? I mean, honestly, Twitch does seem like a game website, but now we're taking over. Now it's a neuroscience website. All right, but the activity part is a bit more nuanced than just more. If by megadose you're referring to the trend of intensive meditation, long duration sessions, retreats, or accumulated thousands of hours of practice, often popularized by figures like Dr. Joe Dispenza or in Vipassana retreats, the science supports your intuition about synchronization, but the activity is actually about efficiency rather than just volume. Here's a breakdown of what happens to the brain during these high dose states compared to a normal resting state. So the yes part, the synchronization. One of the most distinct markers of advanced or intensive meditation is gamma synchrony. Gamma waves are high frequency brain waves associated with binding, the brain connecting information from different regions into a coherent whole. In megadose practitioners, these waves don't just happen randomly, they synchronize across distant parts of the brain. This neural coherence is often subjectively felt as a state of heightened awareness, intense clarity, or a unified moment of insight, which aligns with the oneness often reported in deep states. Hell yeah. Activity, the nuanced part. It is not necessarily more activity overall, it is different activity. If your brain were simply more active everywhere, it would feel like a seizure or extreme anxiety. Instead, two specific shifts happen. The quieting. So this is one of the reasons why it was I thought it was crazy for Alex O'Connor to say brain activity like goes down, and it's like brain activity going up and down doesn't tell us too much about the type of conscious experience you're having until we're seeing that the activity isn't there at all, or that it's not integrated, right? Or that it's, you know, a signal is not reaching far and wide. All right, the quieting, less activity in the noise. The most profound change is the deactivation of the default mode network. This is the network responsible for mind wandering, me-centered thoughts, worrying about the future, and replaying the past. During intensive meditation, activity in this network drops significantly. You aren't doing more thinking, you are doing less self-referential processing. This is why the state feels like a relief from the self. All right, the sharpening, more activity and focus. While the DMN quiets down, other areas light up. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for attention and emotional regulation, becomes highly active. Insula, linked to body awareness and empathy. This area often shows increased activity and cortical thickening over time. That's cool. Neural efficiency, the less is more effect. The overarching trend is neural efficiency. Novice brains are noisy. They burn a lot of energy trying to focus because different networks are fighting each other. For example, trying to focus while the DMN is still worrying about dinner. The megadose brains, long-term practitioners, show a trait where they can switch into deep states with less metabolic energy. The brain isn't working harder in terms of chaotic energy. It is working with less resistance. All right, this is something that I need to flag because we need to put this into the... this is actually very relevant for what we're supposed to be doing this month. So, SRD. Oh my gosh, Alex O'Connor owned by Fax once again. I mean, that was a long time ago. He could have, you know, his understanding could have changed like 5 times since then. So, you know, this isn't a slight. There's no beef. Bro can't catch a break. It's trippy with breath meditation. If your mind becomes really still, then you naturally breathe. You're slow and shallow because your mind and body is not. They're not using much energy. That's awesome. Yeah. That's cool stuff, and that's where we're headed. That's where the practice is heading. Okay, so this is the pivot. The scientific consensus is that while the self may be a narrative construct, the experience of intention is a biologically real high energy state that exerts causal power over the brain. That using meditation, you can reduce the amount of energy required. Here is the practical story of how conscious intention works as a control mechanism and how you can utilize it. The mechanism, intention as a constraint, not a micromanager. The biggest mistake we make is thinking that I, the conscious thinker, am pulling the strings of my muscles like a puppeteer. You aren't. The science says that when you think I am climbing the stairs, your prefrontal cortex creates a massive high-level prediction, a prior. The effect that this thought acts as a constraint. It restricts the state space of the brain. It tells the motor cortex and basal ganglia, you can do whatever you want as long as the outcome matches stairs. As long as the outcome matches this prior that we're dealing with. Now, once again, if it doesn't match the prior, that could also affect what ends up being the top-down conscious signal. Like my foot just slipped. From my view, you could say intention is not intentional. Right. I think that's the... you could say that... You could say that both ways. You could say that the intentions that you think that you have is actually not the intention that your body is acting out. And then you could also think that the intention that your body is acting out. Now, I want to say this in a different way. Yeah, I mean, just saying vice versa is obvious. I thought I was going a different route. But I only half cooked. All right, just transient impersonal mind states preceding action and other mind states. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I think it's like you could think about the intentions that you notice as not something you actually intend. That was the other way. So, just like you don't have control over your thoughts. You don't have control over these intentions. However, we could also think it from the direction of exerting some sort of, if we're going to indulge the ego in the sense that you can think that you can do something, like when I think that I can pick up this pen, I am indulging my ego in some sense, and that causes those priors that it actually affects the brain's actual low level intentionality, which would be dopamine firing towards getting me to pick this thing up. Okay. The utilization, you function as the navigator, not the driver. So bad utilization, trying to micromanage the movement, for example, consciously thinking about your feet while walking. This interferes with the efficient lower level loops. So this isn't saying that it's a bad meditation method, because it can, obviously it's a good meditation practice. It's that, if you're trying to wait, where do we get choking here? Efficient lower level loops choking. But this type of idea is like if you're playing a sport and you're focusing on your muscle movements, people notice that makes you do worse. And you can actually effectively, you could play more effectively if you aren't self-consciously thinking about your every movement you make. So good utilization, setting a clear, high-resolution destination constraint, trusting the subcortical machinery to solve how. All right, the mechanics of focus, buying bandwidth. When you experience, I'm focusing on this, you are feeling the metabolic burn of precision waiting. The science says that the focus is the act of the prefrontal cortex sending signals to the sensory cortex to increase the gain on a specific input channel while inhibiting everything else. This is why when you focus on a certain part of your body, you could feel it while you don't feel everything else. Like you put your attention on there and you keep it there. The spotlight is expensive. This requires massive amounts of norepinephrine and acetylcholine. The strain you feel is the brain burning glucose to suppress. So didn't we figure out that it's not that it's the brain burning glucose? Or is it, it's not that, maybe the thing that we found out was not right is that it's not like the brain has like a certain amount of glucose and once you get low glucose that's it. You're burning the glucose, but the thing that you're feeling ends up being the, what was it? It was like the accumulation of some other type of chemical that creates that feeling. To suppress the default mode network, your wandering mind. All right, the utilization, treat focus like a limited currency. So this is the thing that we found out is not actually the most apt way to think about the brain. That came out from that whole psychology. What was that? What was that thing called? It wasn't called the misinformation thing. It was like a factual. No, I forget what that thing was called. It was the epistemic reckoning. That whole deal. All right, you cannot force focus indefinitely. You are fighting against your own priors. Instead of forcing focus, which is exhausting, change the concept. So this is a huge deal, right? This is the hack that we're going to talk about with framing. Change the concept. If you reframe a boring task as a puzzle to be solved or a threat to be avoided, the salience network automatically assigns high precision without you having to manually push it. So this is one of our main levers. The way that we think about things is going to affect how easy it is for us to maintain that focus or to exert focus on it at all. All right, the power of seeding, the temporal hack. This is the most practical insight from Barrett's work. Conscious intention is too slow to control the present moment. By the time you think I should yell, you have likely already started yelling. The brain is predictive. It prepares actions before you are conscious of them. You can't control the reaction, but you can seed the prediction for next time. So this is our entire document, right? This is what we discovered at the end of part 1. That you can't control the moment right now, but you can do things that control the following moments or tomorrow. So visualization, when you visualize a future event, for example, a difficult conversation, you are running a simulation. You are literally wiring the priors without being in the situation. The result, when the actual conversation happens, your brain uses the simulated prior you created yesterday. You react automatically in the way you want it to. So this is actually where we should probably, this is what we should talk about when we start out in part 2. We have to talk about all the types of things that you could do with your attention and in the moment that's going to affect your motivation and your thoughts and your future, etc. And one of those things could be following this practice of mindfulness. That's going to actually affect how you experience the world tomorrow and the next day. All right, practical takeaway. You use conscious intention offline when you're safe, calm to program your online behavior. All right, the granularity lever, emotional control. Barrett's specific contribution is the concept of emotional granularity. Science says the brain constructs emotions to make sense of bodily affect. So low granularity, I feel bad. So vague prediction, vague action. High granularity, I feel disappointed because my expectations were unmet. The act of precisely naming your state changes the neural dynamics. When you replace I am anxious with I am experiencing high arousal because I care about this outcome, you change the prediction. You shift from a threat response to a challenge response. You have used a thought to reroute your biology. All right, the free won't, the veto power. Benjamin Libet and later researchers showed that while we might not initiate actions consciously, we have the power to stop them. The basal ganglia has a go pathway and a no-go pathway. The most direct power of conscious agency is the veto. You feel the impulse to check your phone. The action has already started preparing. Your conscious intention can send a no-go signal to abort the action before it executes. So this is something we would want to talk about with regarding our drives, like our everyday drives, and obviously addiction and stuff like that. Practical takeaway: agency is often the art of refraining. So we have to talk about also what this no-go signal does over time, and you build the ability to do the no-go signal. That's how you get yourself out of such a state of addiction or habit. To utilize this scientifically, okay. Stop thinking of yourself as the actor. Think of yourself as the film director. You're scripting. You write the script beforehand. You decide how to frame the scene. You yell cut when the actor goes off script. You point the spotlight on what matters, letting the rest fade to black. All right. I'm not going to do that type of metaphor, but Yo, Energy Tomter, what's good? I heard a teacher say you can try labeling stuff using the Sanskrit words because it is more impersonal. Uh, yeah, that's an interesting way of going about it. The big EDH back in the building. Oh, nice. Energy Domter, the big EDH. I like it. All right. We're not at the end yet. I think we're close. Oh my gosh, I wrote a novel between this one. All right, even though there is this abstractly human biological reality of intentionality, something that can be connected to affect and dopamine as a drive towards concerns, what we've been discussing as something that we're not completely in control over. It's through our conceptual understanding, the linguistic self that manifests in our conscious minds, that allows us to cognizantly exert control over this drive of intentionality. This is what creates the constraint, generally speaking, as it talked about. The tricky thing about this topic is that we often reflect, in other words, utilize our top-down attention. I should get rid of this because it's not right to say that. It's just top-down attention. We often reflect unconsciously and only later conceptualize what it is we have done. Now, further in this direction, let's consider the topics of focus and motivation. When asserting some sort of intentionality, we are at the whims of our ability to focus. This requires the necessary mental state, more directly, the necessary physiology, memory, context, etc. It seems that focus and motivation are interconnected as topics. Medications like Vyvanse help people with ADHD maintain focus by seemingly increasing the interest towards objects of focus. Of course, underneath this is simply affecting the release patterns of dopamine over time. I imagine that the release of all neuromodulators, such as acetylcholine and norepinephrine, are affected by baseline states, for example, serotonin levels. So I'm just trying to like build out the type of discussion we want to have in part 2 here, where there's a lot at play in our ability to maintain attention, and it has to do with this idea of motivation as well. So this also seems to relate to the suggestion about changing the concept, affecting the baseline as well as priors. It's hard to determine which conceptualizations are always more intriguing than others, but it's something each person can figure out for themselves. So figuring out what framing helps you actually do this thing more easily. That's going to be something that the document's going to ask people to figure out. And also something that we're going to be looking for in the literature. What things seem to help people, ways of thinking about things. If I understand seating correctly, mindful meditation is an elegant example, albeit more long-term than what Barrett is touching on with the simple reframing or priming the situation with a focused conceptualization. Many parts of these systems are plastic, and that practices such as mindful meditation can actually affect how difficult it is to force focus for extended periods of time. This is an example of how we can think about and build the skill of focus. All right, so this is all new stuff here. Good stuff. A bit off topic, but were you interested in all of these topics at 18 to 20 as you are now? Ooh, I don't think so. Okay, 18 to 20. When did I get into this stuff? I got into this stuff 2017, which makes that puts me at 19 or 20. And the topics I got into, that's like when I started, like I literally found Jordan Peterson and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like I think I was always kind of interested in like philosophy, like conceptually, but I never really like knew philosophy. Maybe started, like I noticed that starting around the age of 17. But then it was only like 19 once I actually started learning stuff from Jordan Peterson. And then it was probably like around 2021 that I started looking into other things. Shout out to Jago who started his minor in philosophy. And even though I didn't have enough time to add extra courses, I just started reading the stuff that was in his curriculum, at least some of it. So that got me interested in a lot of those things, and I was trying to figure out who's saying what. Like at this point, I had no understanding of the space, like the space of philosophy. So I had no understanding of who's actually saying things that are like practical today. But I think I was noticing that certain branches of philosophy are more or less practical, and that's kind of where I was interested in, especially because I started out with a Jordan Peterson introduction to philosophy, and his maps of meaning stuff is quite practical. So, 18 to 20, Stan was studying at Harvard. He had no time for anything else but computer science. I couldn't get into Harvard even if I nailed my SAT scores. Even if I did a perfect SAT, I couldn't get into Harvard. All right, the surest way to ruin a man is to introduce him to philosophy without supervision. Right, but I think getting introduced via Jordan Peterson was a good amount of supervision. I think that was pretty. I was happy with that supervision. Wow, I'm studying computer engineering and I find myself on the exact path. Nice. So yeah, Onion Helmet was memeing there, but I was studying computer science at the time. Like from age 18 to whatever it was, 22, I was in university for computer science. So perhaps that is a very similar path. But yeah, I think at some point, I think because Jordan Peterson mentioned it, I read Being in Time, and that was a huge deal because that had me thinking about the very like ways we could talk about truth, but in relation to our phenomenology, like how we experience the world. And that's something that was really important for me to ground this stuff in intuition as well, like how we actually experience things. And then also, yeah, it was when Jago took a specific course on theory of mind that made a huge impact as well, because he started reading stuff like Sellers, which I found incredibly boring, but then they forced him to read Articulating Reasons by Brandom, and that was it. That was the good stuff. Highly recommend. Yeah, and then after that, I probably read like Being in Time again, and then I wanted to read more from Brandom, so I read A Spirit of Trust. And between all that stuff and all that I had been watching and whatnot, I think at a certain point I knew I could do some type of writing. And then at, I don't know, 2 years ago, when I ironically started taking Vyvanse, I was like, oh, I could do this now, because now I have the attention to actually exert, more than 2 hours of effort a day, and I can, actually make things happen. So then I started grinding, and then that was April, and July was when we started streaming, I think, of 2024. Okay. If I had to give advice to my 20-year-old self, what would you tell him? I don't know. In terms of like a, in terms of like a time travel type of situation, I would probably tell him like, hey, just do everything the same way you did it. Enjoy the time. I mean, 20-year-old, where am I at? 20 years old. I still had a ton of college left to enjoy. I was lucky enough that my college experience was just straight up crack in terms of fun. It was just constantly fun. Yeah, I don't know. Enjoy those moments. In terms of like where to get somewhere, I would probably just tell. I wouldn't even want myself to start doing anything else though, because if I told myself to start reading more, then that would take away from the time that I was spending with my friends. And fortunately, my experience in college was the kids on my freshman dorm floor ended up being a friend group to this day. So it like by the time I was 20 years old, making friends wasn't necessarily like something I had to do because the friends were already there and we just kind of stuck together. Okay. Finish school and get a job first. Don't do substances. In terms of like drugs, are we talking about? Don't do substances. Also make good friends. This is very important. Not just hanging with the boys' friends. Right. Yeah. Make good friends. Yeah, I agree. That stuff can sustain you. Yeah, I think. Yeah, the question of like what I would say to someone else that's 20 years old, that would be something different though. I would probably say try to explore, find things that you find interesting. Take a playful attitude regarding, not only what but your identity, also like your interests. Figure out what is fun, figure out what you don't find interesting, but also don't like commit to you know keeping something. If something isn't fun one time, don't say that that's something that's never going to be fun for you. Stuff like that. And yeah, start exploring, read stuff. That's always cool. Try to expand. What's my perspective on the concept from Leotard about out of curiosity? What is this perspective? Meta narrative on this concept. In social theory, a meta narrative is an overarching narrative that about smaller historical narratives, which offers a society legitimation through the anticipated completion of a as yet unrealized master idea. Stories within stories. Okay. I don't know what there would be to get, or I don't know what there would be for me to have a strong opinion on. Okay, here we go. Propose that meta narratives should give way to localized narratives, which can throw off a grand narrative by bringing into focus a singular event. Borrowing from the works of Wittgenstein, ding ding ding, and his theory of the models of discourse, Lyotard constructs his vision of a progressive politics grounded in the cohabitation of a whole range of diverse and always locally legitimated language games, multiple narratives coexisting. I wouldn't say that this is the most accessible way about talking about these things, but yeah, we can interpret, that we're dealing with, everyone's dealing with. First of all, everyone's dealing with their own subjective stories, but people's stories are pragmatically similar to each other, and people's stories are constantly changing, subtly so, and yeah, this is how this is a similar view that we take in the document how culture comes about. It's culture obviously, affects people's learning and affects their upbringing, but then they also affect the culture. It's a two-way street. All right, do not spend your time thinking about philosophy if you're financially unsecure. Every great philosopher was active. They were either rich aristocrats or made philosophy their profession. A few had to take another job while doing philosophy, like Spinoza. That's rare. Don't dismiss Maslow's hierarchy, my younglings. Stand at the tippy top. What does that mean? What is at the top of the Maslow hierarchy? I kind of cheat with the Maslow's hierarchy though. Okay, I guess technically I would be near the top here, but the way I cheat here is because I just happen to be low in neuroticism, and that allows you to just bypass like a lot of these you know layers, and it's not fair. It's just a genetic lottery thing, but yeah. That being said, I like it. If I get rid of physiological needs, I mean, we start testing the extent of the you know that personality trait out, but I feel like I would still be decently well off. I don't want to test that out, obviously, but you know. This is possibly one of the most important concepts ever devised. I'm not even joking. Oh, for the even for this document, right? Now, yeah, how would Maslow's hierarchy relate to that other framing that Dr. K was talking about, where you need the feel as if that you have control. You need some sort of recognition socially, and you need some sort of, was it challenge? I forget what the last thing was. Self-actualization theory. That's what it was, right? Self-actualization. Is this Maslow as well? Because I put self-actualization in that we got Maslow. Theory, right? Theory. That was this literally it? Okay. Um. Yeah, maybe this was literally him. If that is the theory that I'm thinking about. Exactly. Yep. So then, yeah, that might be the most important thing. Another Yang Gang banger. Basic needs and such. Have we talked about Yang on this channel? Um, would you say the concept of meta narrative is an adequate conceptualization? What do you mean by adequate conceptualization? Like, what's the goal here? It depends. Yeah, it depends what we're trying to get at. I mean, for the document, I would say it's way too inaccessible. Like, I don't want to. Like, I'm not even stoked about the way that like Jordan Peterson talks about narrative, with like he uses narrative ambiguously across like a bunch of different levels of abstraction. He talks about like when we talk about our bodies like inherent intentionality, like what we've been talking about today. He would describe that as like that's like the base level of narrative, and then you can go to the level of like what we consciously think about and reflect upon. We've got those types of narratives. Now, once you get to that conceptual level, you could talk about a bunch of different narratives of different abstraction, where my story of going to work might be embedded in a larger story of being a good person, or being a good family person because I'm trying to make money for my family, and that's embedded in a story. And so, like, he talks about stories in that way. And then, he could also go into the story of a group, the group story. But I'd like to talk about these things in a much more close to home, what's actually happening, pragmatic way. So, we can't just talk about meta narrative. We have to talk about what is actually happening when people have different understandings, and those understandings clash. What's affecting the trajectory of everyone's understanding? All right, I think I'm going to call it here, and then we can start up with some fun, like this stuff tomorrow, because this is pretty fun, as far as I think. But yeah, thanks everyone for chilling. Shout out Yang Gang. Uh, yeah, enjoy everyone's rest of the day. Enjoy your night, if you will, or for Darmadam, your midday, your noontime. All right. See you later.